Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Joanna Costello at the International Solar Energy Society headquarters in Freiburg, Germany, and I'll take you through the first 5 minutes and give you a small introduction presentation before we begin with the webinar presentations. So thank you all for joining us from all around the world. We're delighted to see that we have over 400 people registered for this month's webinar from over 80 different countries, so you're all very welcome. This webinar title is the IEA Solar Heating and Cooling Solar Academy, Solar Energy in Urban Planning. This is a webinar of the IEA SHC program Solar Academy, hosted by the International Solar Energy Society, ISIS. We are looking forward to all of your participation and also your questions in the Q&A session later. Before we begin with the webinar presentations, I would like to inform you about what ISIS is and stands for. The International Solar Energy Society is a non-profit, UN-accredited membership NGO. The ISIS vision is to achieve 100% renewable energy for all, used efficiently and wisely. We represent a diverse membership of academics, researchers, energy practitioners, consultants, students, businesses, and advocates. ISIS works together with like-minded organizations from countries around the world to advance the renewable energy transformation. By becoming a member of ISIS, you are supporting the 100% renewable energy movement. For further details, please have a look at our websites, www.ises.org, or our membership page, join.ises.org. We understand that sometimes the time of the webinar may not suit people in many parts of the world. While we try to alternate webinar times to suit as many time zones as possible, it is not always possible. Therefore, we will post the recording of the webinar on the ISIS website, on the ISIS YouTube channel, and on the IEA SHC Solar Academy website and the IEA SHC Solar Academy YouTube channel. You are welcome and encouraged to ask questions at any time throughout the webinar. To ask a question, select the questions pane on your screen and type in your question. Please specify who your question is directed to. Questions will be addressed after all the presentations in a Q&A session. Our moderator, Mr. Ken Guthrie, will read the questions aloud during the Q&A session, so we welcome you to send questions throughout the webinar. A special thank you to the International Energy Agency's Solar Heating and Cooling Programme IEA SHC Solar Academy for the organisation of this webinar. I will pass over to the webinar moderator, Mr. Ken Guthrie, who is the chair of the IEA SHC programme. Ken will give you further information about the programme and take you through the webinar agenda. Wishing you all a very enjoyable webinar, and I will now hand the screen over to Ken. Ken, we can see your screen, but I think you still have your telephone on mute.
Thank you. Yes, thanks Joanna for the introduction, and just a quick introduction to the International Energy Agency Solar Heating and Cooling Program. As you can see on the screen, we have 20 countries in the European Commission and 5 sponsor organisations that spread throughout the world. But with our sponsor organisations, we also have another additional 47 countries which we reach into. So this program covers a large part of the earth. We have the new Solar Academy, which we've only started this year, and the aim of that is to share our work that we've been undertaking for the past 40 years, where we support our research and development and implementation of solar heating and cooling projects. It's to get that work and that information out to a much wider audience. So thank you for that. You can participate in the Solar Academy work by these webinars, which we hold quarterly and hosted by ISIS. We have videos highlighting our work and other solar thermal issues. We have 11 video package already on there from the last year's Qatar's Green Expo held in Doha. We also have national days when we get some of our experts together when we have meetings in different countries around the world, and we have an additional opportunity for on-site training provided by our experts in IEA SHC member countries. So if you want to get more information, you can visit our website, www.iea-shc.org, or you can follow us on social media, on Twitter and LinkedIn. And in particular, I'd like to invite you all to join us in Abu Dhabi for the Solar Heating and Cooling in Buildings and Industry Conference, which is being held together with the Solar World Conference run by the International Solar Energy Society. This will be on the 29th of October until the 2nd of November in Abu Dhabi. So please come along to that and hear some more. So now I'll start with our expert speakers in the panel. We've got 4 great speakers tonight, and sorry, it is tonight in Australia. It may be in different times in other parts of the world. But the first one is Professor Marja Wall, who is from the Building and Design at Lund University in Sweden. She is the project manager for the International Energy Agency Solar Heating and Cooling Task 51 on solar energy and urban planning, and she also led the Task 41 on solar energy and architecture. So Marja will give us present an overview of what happened in Task 51, and then we'll lead into the other speakers. So thank you very much, Marja.
So thank you, Ken. Yes, I am going to give you an overview of Task 51. And this project will it will be finalized end of this year. And many are today aiming at zero energy buildings and communities. And this means that we need to reduce the energy demand and increase the use of renewable energy. And solar energy is one important renewable energy source. For buildings, this will increase the use of the building envelope as an active solar collector for solar thermal and photovoltaics. Since such systems are rather large, they could easily become a dominant part of the building envelope and highly influencing the building's architecture and the urban landscape. If large-scale solar systems are placed in the countryside as solar fields, this could also be perceived as very dominant. And therefore we need to plan and design in a good way. Due to a lack of knowledge, strategies and methods, we therefore developed the project Task 51 that started in 2013. And the main objectives are to provide support to urban planners, authorities and architects and others in order to achieve urban areas with solar energy solutions. This includes to develop approaches, methods and tools to support a long-term urban energy strategy. Also, heritage and aesthetic issues are important here. And how we plan a city could influence the possibilities for solar energy production and daylight access for many years ahead, either hinder or ease for a long-term sustainability. Another objective is to prepare for and strengthen education on solar energy in urban planning. The material we produce should therefore be useful for courses at universities as well as for professionals. And we are 12 countries collaborating, from European countries and from Australia, Canada, and China. We focus our work on three main areas. First, the planning of new urban areas, which is very different from the existing areas. And existing urban areas could be that we either add new buildings as infill in existing environments, or when solar systems are integrated in existing buildings. Also, we studied large-scale solar integrations in landscapes and their possibilities to both supply the region and neighborhood with renewable energy and at the same time preserve the land and, for example, use it for food production. And we are including solar thermal, photovoltaics, and passive solar, such as daylighting, in our studies. To manage all the work, we are organized in 4 subtasks with different subtask leaders. Subtask A on legal framework, barriers and opportunities is led by Mark Snow from Australia, and he will soon present some findings. Subtask B on processes, methods and tools is led by Marja Lundgren and Johan Dahlberg from Sweden, and they will also present today. Subtask C on case studies and action research has functioned as a main source of testing new methods and tools and to learn from local initiatives in each participating country. And this part is coordinated by Gabrielle Lobacaro and Carmel Lindqvist from Norway. Subtask D finally focused on education and dissemination, and it's led by Tanja Siems and Katharina Simon from Germany. Today we will present more material from the first 2 parts, A and B, but I will anyway mention and highlight a few example results for you to check further about the case studies and educational issues. The work with case studies has involved all participants in Task 51 and served as a way to learn from reality and to test new developments. Each participating country has worked locally by cooperating with municipalities, architects, and other actors. Furthermore, comparisons between the different cases are carried out and lessons learned are documented. The extensive report on case studies is finalized and already available on the Task 51 website. It contains a description of 34 cases from 10 countries, more than 400 pages. And the comparisons of cases and a report on lessons learned will be published later this year. Each case is also made as a PDF brochure and will be easy to find on a map and then download if you don't want to download the whole report. This map is not yet available, but will be soon. The work on education and dissemination consists of different parts. The state-of-the-art from participating countries regarding approaches and methods in education is documented in a report available on the Task 51 website as well. One conclusion was that there is a great need to strengthen education on solar energy issues related to urban planning. Soon a second report will follow, focusing on solar tools in education. It is presently in review. In this report, different software tools have been used in education and compared. Also, new developments are discussed in this report. Also, as an example, a booklet describing a summer school on solar energy in urban planning has been published. It shows how to set up and run an interdisciplinary summer school using a real case situation in urban planning. This report is available both in English and German on the website. Another part already online that I want to highlight is the website on innovative solar products. This website is developed by EPFL in Switzerland, and here you can download product sheets describing solar thermal and PV products for building integration. As an inspiration, we have more results to come, so please check the website from time to time, and of course listen to the next presenters. It is really a very good teamwork that enables all this work to be done, and I want to say thank you to all participants in the task. And also, of course, thank you to those who are listening today. And now more results will be presented. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Maria. That was a very good introduction, and I'm sure everybody's now aware of the structure of the work that has been done. Our next speaker is Dr. Mark Snow, who's a research fellow at the University of New South Wales in Australia. And as Maria has outlined, he led the subtask on legal frameworks, barriers and opportunities. And he'll discuss that legislative and voluntary initiatives and their barriers and opportunities for solar energy and urban planning. So thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Ken, and thanks to ISIS for the webinar. Joanna, I'm sure you'll tell me if you can't hear me properly. I must apologise. I'm just recovering from the flu, which has been very prevalent down here in Australia. So what I want to do in the 15 minutes I have is I wanted to provide you with a brief overview of some of the legislative aspects of solar energy and urban planning. Some of the considerations and issues that we identified during the task work, and particularly focusing in on the solar access rights, some legal examples, and this ranges from national, regional and local level, as well as some of the heritage controls for urban amenity and from an aesthetic point of view. Now, I must admit, we've only got 15 minutes, so I will touch on as much of this as I can and provide some overall findings in my concluding remarks. And hopefully this will provide a nice segue into the next presentation, which will start to provide some methods, approaches and tools that urban planners and related stakeholders can use to head towards zero energy, low carbon living solutions. So I think it's important for us to just define from our IEA task work what solar energy is in terms of urban planning consideration. It's really only one aspect of many other considerations that urban planners have to wrestle with. Consequently, we observe that the urban planning it's a technical and, let's not forget, a political process that is focused on the control of the use of land and the design of the urban environment. And importantly, they provide critical infrastructure and urban services. And we're seeing a lot more focus here on ensuring resilience in cities to cope with a multitude of factors such as population growth, urban consolidation pressures, social cohesion, mobility, transportation, of course, economic development, importantly, healthy living, climate change mitigation, adaptation, etc., etc. So you can see the complexities that we're wrestling with to try and maintain and ensure sustainable cities into the future. So what my Task 51 colleagues, what we wanted to do was to better understand, where does solar energy fit in the order of priorities urban planners consider? How is it considered? How well is it considered? And from learning from their needs, what are the knowledge products that are required to help them make informed decisions? And I do like this cartoon from John Carter, where it's a picture here of this person standing out. So they're actually street lamps powering my panels. So it's become clear to us that solar energy, whilst well defined from a passive solar design perspective, there is a limited awareness of what active solar technologies provide and how they might be embraced as a key element of the planning process. And I think it's really important for us to really understand the context in which we're working here. And the energy landscape is changing rapidly. And we had Dr. Jeremy Leggett come down to Australia in December from Solar Century. And one of the things that resonated with many of us here was that he mentioned that renewables is the insurgency that is disrupting the fossil fuel incumbents. And we can now see that that's happening far quicker than the incumbents and their political proponents would ever like to admit to. So there's this tremendous tug of war that's occurring in a number of places around the world. We're seeing that baseload power is a legacy term now, and it's been overtaken by the value of dispatchable power and reliable battery storage and the way in which we utilize energy and energy systems. Distributed energy is challenging centralized energy provision, and now cities are showing some significant leadership in this area, more than ever. And what we're looking at here is that they want to utilize their assets to get back into the business of energy supply. We have to remember that a lot of local governments used to be the electricity supplier years ago. And what that does is it allows them to have energy control, and what they're also looking for is to provide, use solar to future-proof themselves from rising energy prices. And we're seeing more and more evidence across the world, and particularly New York, after some of the disasters they had with Hurricane Sandy, and probably now with Florida and elsewhere, is the use of solar for providing emergency power sources to get the city back running up again very quickly. And this is starting to bring to the attention of emergency service providers and also planners the importance of renewable technologies in cities. So we also need to understand that some of these drivers are actually, say for example in China, is more driven by the fact that they're starting to realize, or they have realized, that to make the air in their cities much cleaner by using renewables is a much cheaper option than actually trying to deal with the consequences of respiratory disease and the fallout of the uninhabitable nature of their cities. So this places urban planners front and center with this energy change process, and many local governments are leveraging their collective weight to procure solar products for their communities at a lower price in bulk buy arrangements. Some are actually helping to facilitate solar finance, and that can be attached to their rates so that that is part of the building, and when that building is on sold, the value and the attribution, or the payback of that solar system is passed on to the next owner. And we also have here in Australia some challenging situations where local governments want to provide their energy and their solar energy, etc., to others in close proximity to them in cities, and currently the marketplace doesn't allow that to happen, and it is not for technical reasons. This particular picture on the right hand side that I'm just, this is South Australia, and we had a catastrophic climatic event which took the network out. So whilst we are seeing some increase in large scale solar, and that's fantastic, but given its centralized generation, there are some vulnerabilities around that. I'm not to say that that's not going to continue on, it's important, but we're starting to see that people who own the building assets want to have control of their energy, and that's understandable, to maximize their assets. So this is a really important consideration in terms of where we're starting from and what we're thinking about. And for what I'm showing here is the Australian PV Institute Solar Mapping Tool, which offers local governments and building owners an ability to look at the potential of utilising solar from a mapping perspective. And I draw your attention to that particular website up here to have a look at that. And what we've done, what the University of South Wales and other parties have done, linked in with the Australian PV Institute, is to provide a map that allows us to identify the penetration rates of PV in postcode level, at local government level, and also at a political electorate level, and that's really stimulated a lot of interest and given it profile that it otherwise wouldn't have had. And there are a number of other really good tools internationally that also provide this type of information. There is also pvoutput.org, and that's an international tool that one of the students at the University of New South Wales developed. And this is a fantastic tool in terms of regionally, locally, you can actually identify how different PV systems are working, solar PV in this situation. So I will talk about solar thermal systems as well, and we must be very mindful not to be too PV centric in this talk. But what we're also seeing is that there's commercial buildings, they're investing in site solar to improve their building energy ratings and their energy costs. And using many conventional technologies, both solar PV and solar thermal systems here in China, with solar water tanks resting on the balconies behind a facade of horizontal vacuum tubes. We're also seeing metal absorbers in triple plane glazing facades for steel construction companies. We're seeing both solar air systems and solar water systems to help provide the needs of the water needs, the heating needs of the building itself. And there's also some really innovative building integrated solar thermal architectural systems as well, which are aesthetically pleasing too. And I'll come back to that later in the talk. And we can also both combine this, both PV and thermal systems to get a dual benefit. And as people are aware, although many urban planners weren't aware typically of the difference between PV and thermal systems, and hopefully this task activity will help to clarify that. In many situations in cities, the roof is not necessarily very large, and to utilize a way in which we can draw the air from the back of the solar panels and dump that air into the building allows us to maximize the benefit to the actual building occupant. And also building integrated roof systems. Here we have Tractile Roof System here in Australia, which provides both solar electricity and hot water, and is integrated and wants to be part of the building components that developers and construction companies utilize off the shelf. And the prices have dropped dramatically now, and that's against the increasing prices of electricity as a driver. So this is another very good resource that I certainly want you to look at. This is the Task 41, which provides some other details around solar energy systems in architecture. And Ria mentioned this, but I'd also just like to add that this also provides some, I guess, archives of products that used to be available. So many of the products that are there are actually available, and this is a very good website that's being updated progressively. Okay, so the main part of my talk is about realizing solar value as well. So I think when we deal with solar in cities, and particularly with this, we've got a clear understanding of daylighting provision, it doesn't necessarily lend itself at all to active solar systems. So if we look at it from this perspective, some of our facades in Sydney provide similar optimal performance to a North German optimally oriented system. And if you realize that on the west facade, and you might put your solar technology on the west facade, and that will be generating power in the afternoon, the price and the value of that power may be more valuable to you in that afternoon period. And not only that, it may defray a lot of the thermal gain that you don't want, which has impacts on the air conditioning system. So it's really important for us to start to think about the technology utilizations, the way in which they may be impacted by the shade of urban environments and how we can utilize that. This example here, Montpellier solar food farm, is a good example of a way in which communities can buy into the solar systems that may not have access to suitable solar resources, and it's also providing some shelter and support for the growth of vegetables and food items. So what we have very much at a local level is building approval considerations for the siting of solar panels. Interestingly, this also applies, for example, again, as I mentioned to you before, in New York, where the firefighting regulations require the solar panels to be set back from the roof of the actual building to allow access for various reasons. And this changes depending on what jurisdiction you're in. What is really quite interesting is we've got an example here that I'm showing in Melbourne, which has just recently been installed, where this is an Onyx solar balustrade glass system, and the prices of those compared to conventional balustrade costs are significantly less than what most people might appreciate. But what they were able to do, because they met a 7.5-star sustainability rating, which is an incredibly high sustainability rating, they were able to negotiate with the local government to in fact go another level higher. So with a higher density allowance for that developer, now obviously that creates some potential ramifications, but if it incentivizes sustainability outcomes of this sort and doesn't have a huge impact on others doing that, then this is certainly an interesting case study. And let's think about it in terms of the solar access consideration. So solar access is the ability to have uninterrupted direct rays of sunlight falling onto one's property. The Romans have certainly had some very clear instructions as to how they utilize solar in their cities in the 2nd century. One thing that's quite interesting as a legacy is this ancient lights here in London, which and elsewhere in the UK, where if a window had uninterrupted light for 20 years, then there was a guarantee for the rest of its lifetime for that access to occur. So there was a right to light that was occurred through that particular process. So what I want to do now, and I'm just going to try and I'll draw on Australia, and we will be documenting a whole range of different particular experiences from around the world, but because I know this a little bit more, I will focus on Australia for now, so please bear with me. I just want to just go through some of the legal judgments that are occurring to give you some insight into where some of our challenges and areas of focus should be. So these are three, and what I'm going to do is just going to highlight in red what are the consequences are. So what we had a situation here was that we had a decision where solar was being shaded, and the determination in this first instance was the courts determined that under the law that it wasn't for them to review the consent on its particular merits, and it was the function is to review the process followed by council rather than to make a determination against whether solar should be allowed or not. And they're working within the current realms of what the legislation requires and the legal judgments require them. This second one is it's about a solar system being put on a common boundary. It was actually on a carport roof, and ultimately the determination was that there was obviously a risk that was placed on that particular occupant, and it wouldn't be unreasonable for them to assume that there would possibly be future impacts from development of adjoining land. It was a risk that they took. And the third one was this wrestling between the solar access of solar collectors as it relates to, okay, well, we need urban consolidation, we need developments. So what we're finding, and we've got some literature, and Adrian Bradbrook was very prominent over the last 30 years in this area. I think he's since retired, unfortunately, but he was an expert in solar and active systems in Australia. And we did some work with the Australian PV Institute over 8 years ago, and that needs updating. And what it is to provide local governments with guidelines from which they can actually make informed decisions. And And what we have in Australia is that the local environment plans are the thing, is the framework or that underpins a lot of the determinations of under which local governments develop their guidelines. And we can see clearly that daylight protection is very well considered, but it isn't necessarily applicable to active solar collector systems. So what we have is, and this is generic also to other jurisdictions, we have a solar access law that is focused on passive solar only, generally. It's focused on building codes, energy targets and safety, and also heritage controls and aesthetic cultural considerations. So what we found when we were looking at the legislation and the legal aspects was that it wasn't appropriately protecting solar access for the purpose of energy generation, and typically can discourage it. And there are other means by which people had to use to contest somebody overshading their system. And part of that is the way in which the way in which responsibility is delineated within the Constitution, and then passed on, in this case, to the states and territories, and then often is left to the local governments to make up their own particular rules and determinations. So where we see it being fairly clearly falling into, from a legal protection perspective, is the law of nuisance. And that is very subjective, and there's no automatic legal right or protection for solar access that is clearly articulated. And there are a number of measures that the different jurisdictions have utilised internationally, some of which have been time protection, some of them have been restrictive covenants and setbacks and height restrictions, and others have been very measured solar envelopes. And we also have a situation whereby if we had solar panels on a building and a neighbouring building then shadowed in completely those PV systems, they may have arrangement where those PV systems are relocated to the new development. There's an arrangement between the two. Either there's compensation or there's a novation of that particular asset across. So let me just quickly touch on, as time's getting the better of me, the similarities between the different countries and the regions within the countries. So I've just put a couple of dot points here which sort of sprang out to us, and that was the first one I've already mentioned. The second one is that there's no, there are different legal systems and determinations. Some, say for example, the cantons in Switzerland, they determine much of the legal outcomes of building arguments or contesting of building activities between neighbourhoods. The urban planning legislation and the energy planning is typically separate, and we feel that that is probably creating silos that is not allowing for closer consideration of an optimal outcome in many instances. And then there's this waning or fluctuating uncertainty in terms of investing in solar, both in terms of the subsidies that are available, the feed-in tariffs, and also the way in which the market is maturing and being able to stand on its own 2 feet. And we also have voluntary considerations or voluntary goals or targets that are established by cities to align to meeting their Paris agreements and also their climate actions. And some of them are aspirational and some of them are very firm in terms of trying to meet their goals. But what we also saw that was a clear hierarchical decision-making process, and it was difficult at times for implementing good solar energy outcomes in cities at different scales. Now, in terms of the differences, we know, I mean, apart from perhaps Canada, the UK and Australia, who sort of share some of their legal heritage, many have different systems. Many are very much based on building codes and being very defined and very prescriptive in terms of what you can or cannot do, particularly in Germany and Austria. And others have a very different approach elsewhere in Italy, and we will be showcasing that in our reports. And this varies depending on the scale and whether it's national, regional, local level. And there are also obviously varying cultural values that are placed from an aesthetic consideration. And what I want to just identify is that this can create issues to stifle solar integration, particularly for historical designated areas. And heritage committees can sometimes have no real power, and there can be some pretty poor outcomes, or they have too much and they probably are not fully aware of what technological possibilities there are. So when we look at the heritage and cultural drivers, on the left-hand side here, we have a PV system in Canberra that has just basically been optimized, but from an urban aesthetic perspective, it's really an eyesore. And we can see here in the Vatican and in the UK, and this is Solar Century, that it can be integrated with heritage sensitivity. And one of the outcomes, and I'll only just touch on this briefly, because I'm sure the other talkers will talk about this, is this particular tool developed by EPFL, which is a fantastic tool whereby urban planners can look at the acceptability, the visibility, the quality of the site of different outcomes, and define what the different regions, urban regions, should respond to or be guided to. There's also solarplanning.org, which is a tool also developed within the task, which allows you to play around with the urban design form and see what impacts it has from a solar perspective. So my time is getting very close to being up, so I'll just wrap up. In terms of what our key findings are, is that planning rules treat sunlight as a matter of amenity, not sustainability, and that obviously needs to change. The thrust of planning policy called for consideration of existing urban areas. We have very archaic, we have solar technologies that are not explicitly protected and would have been much better catered for many years ago. And often the protection only applies to limited circumstances, such as site setbacks. So we have a situation where there's ad hoc decisions being made, and it's hard for the courts to have jurisdiction to be able to determine without unreasonable terms what constitutes an impermissible interference. And this relates to the subjectivity of dealing with nuisance in their determinations. We do have examples where it can be very prescriptive, and I think this is where we're starting to move towards, whereby investors are getting greater certainty through urban planners and heritage committees using decision support tools so that they can guide and understand what the impacts are for utilising solar in urban environments and the future impacts that might present. So I'm going to close it up there. I hope I haven't gone over time too much, and thank you very much. And I also want to thank the Australian PV Institute for their support in this work program.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you very much for that very interesting presentation. Just before we move on to our next speaker, I just want to let you know that there are questions that can be asked. So please, if you've got some questions, please put them forward, and I'll allocate them in our question and answer session at the end. So please bring them up. If they're up there earlier, they're more likely to get discussed. Our next speaker is Johan Dahlberg, who's a Sustainability Advisor and Research Coordinator at White Architecture. And he's going to discuss solar energy and urban planning processes. Thank you, Johan.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you, ISIS, for inviting me to speak here today. Yes, I will speak about some of the results we've had mainly from Subtask B in Task 51, about how to integrate solar energy in urban planning processes. And while this relates back a lot to what Mark has spoken about, I would try to not get into legislative issues as much as practical examples. But firstly, I would like to talk about the planning process and the role of the urban planner, as I find that we found that extremely important, as it varies between different national and local contexts. One way to look at it, to understand the role of the urban planner, is from this illustration. It's it's drawn from a concept by Stuart Brand. It's called Sharing Layers, and it explains the different layers of a city and how the interior of buildings and the structures of buildings and even the envelope and entire building might change over time, but the site itself and urban plans tend to be fairly permanent and stay the same. And in the context of solar energy and urban planning, I think this is extremely important to understand that while I think in Australia and many countries southern Europe, the penetration of solar energy in the market has grown rapidly, in Nordic countries such as Sweden, it's still seen many times as a novelty. And but at the same time, the urban plans we design today and the structures we design today will have an effect on future possible integration of solar energy. And urban planners need to understand this today and not looking 20 years in the future. Another thing to understand the planning process, while, as Mark said, the legislative frameworks and the planning traditions are very varied between different local contexts. Sometimes local authorities have a lot of power over the urban planning process, and sometimes it's private developers that have a lot of power. What we've done in Task 51 is trying to find a common lowest denominator to explain the urban planning process and the different stages. We just quickly go through this, and we've found that part of it is in the comprehensive strategical planning stages. Another part that I will speak more about later is in the urban and landscapes design stages. Sometimes we look at these in, for example, master plans of large-scale urban developments. The third one is detailed development plans, and they often work as implementation of the urban design, and here is usually where urban designs are tested against legal frameworks and so forth. And the last one, of course, is the architectural design stage of buildings or landscape systems, where you choose products of solar energy projects and so forth. But I will illustrate how solar energy can play a role through a couple of examples, mostly from personal experiences, but also draw from general experiences from the project Task 51. And if you remember what Maria said about the Task 51 in general, that we deal with new urban developments, existing urban developments, as well as sensitive protective landscape. I will mostly speak of cases that has to do with new urban developments, while some of it relates to existing as well. But one project I would like to bring up is Stockholm Royal Seaport. It's the largest urban development in Stockholm, capital of Sweden. I worked in this project quite a bit over the last few years and learned some insights of how they work with sustainability. And it's also very similar in size and scale and time frame to many large-scale urban developments around Europe today, in growing cities in Europe. And just to give you some figures to understand it, I won't read through them, but the first buildings were finished in 2012, and it's supposed to be finished in 2030. A very important aspect of this that has proven incredibly important in the planning process is that the local authority, in this case the city of Stockholm, owns the land and develops it themselves, while they sell the land, plots on the land to private developers. And this gives them a huge opportunity in setting specific requirements. And this is what I wanted to bring up, that it is shown generally, and I'll illustrate this through this example, that setting early targets and vision for the project is extremely important. The city of Stockholm has worked heavily on a large-scale sustainability program where solar energy is just one little piece of the puzzle, but it is included. But the overall vision and targets doesn't necessarily, it's not very specific because it has to be used over a period of 20 years. And while technology and traditions and knowledge increases over that time. So they use, for every more detailed project, they use implementation programs where they use specific requirements. And I will get back to that when it comes specifically to solar energy. And the last piece of the puzzle, I would say, that's incredibly important in this process is to really follow up on the requirements that they've set. And they do is the Excel sheet that I showed just to illustrate how they do this continuously through the planning process, from the early stages through the building design, and checking when the building is built also. And they also share this in public reports to show the benchmark of the project. And when it comes to energy principles in Stockholm Seaport, it's the principles are that they are supposed to have local energy generation, highly energy efficient buildings, low carbon footprint, especially from embodied energy, and energy efficient construction processes. And when it comes to locally generated energy, that's obviously most relevant here. The set requirement at the moment, and this may change over time, but at the moment it's that any developer that builds a building in the area needs to have 2 kilowatt-hours per square meter flow ratio in the buildings of PV, or 6 kilowatt-hours of square meter solar thermal, or a combination of both. In this case, because solar thermal is more efficient than PV, so the requirement is a little bit higher. And this is just to show you some experts of the follow-up report to show how the different developers have what targets they've reached because of these requirements. And just understand that this is very unique in a Swedish and Scandinavian context, that you have developers in the same development installing PV on this scale. And one interesting thing to note in this diagram is that the larger diagram is actually from an earlier phase when they could use the PV production to deduct from the energy performance calculations, which meant that it was a high motivation to install PV to reduce, to be able to have a higher energy demand. While in the smaller diagram, it's a later phase where they chose not to do this, and the PV is sort of calculated by itself. And it shows that the PV output's a little bit lower in this case. But some of the success factors from Stockholm Seaport, and I know this goes for a lot of other large-scale urban development projects around Europe, is that there's always been an early dialogue between local authority and developers. They set specific requirements connected to the overall visions and strategies of the area. They have a large scale, and this is what I'm involved with mostly, capacity building program with knowledge sharing between developers, experts, research, academia, and the city itself. And this is really important to really build up the knowledge base of how to do this. They have a really robust organization with a sustainability manager, and they have a very clear process that I won't get into right now, but they have a very clear process around land procurement, architectural competitions, and the sustainability implementation programs to make sure that the ideas and the targets and the strategies and the requirements are really enforced from an early stage all through the process. The next thing I wanted to speak about, that I think this is one part I think urban planners need to learn more about, how to use requirements in urban planning processes. Next thing is solar rights, and this Mark already spoke a bit this about access to rights. I want to bring up one example we had here in close to Stockholm, in the city of Uppsala, a building we designed called Frodeparken, which has the largest solar facade in Scandinavia. And this was finished in 2013. At the moment, about where this photo is taken from, it's taken from the south. A new building is being erected. And obviously, to anyone that knows about solar energy, you immediately ask the question, how will this affect the solar facade on the building? And while this might look like a bad case, it's actually, when we studied it, it's a pretty good example of how the knowledge around the effects of the new building was used early on in the process. And because the plans for the new building that's on this diagram was known before Frode-parken was built. And in the energy calculations for the PV facade, it was incorporated. The problem or the issue was really that the municipality didn't really know how to deal with it. And I think the developer, in some cases, hasn't been really aware of the coming consequences of the new building. But it puts, the point of this is that urban planners really need to be aware of the consequences of putting new buildings in urban context and understanding how it affects solar energy issues. I don't personally think that it always should, solar energy installations always should be protected at any cost, because urban planning has to weigh a lot of different aspects against each other. And in this case, I think the new building will also have a lot of benefits. The last thing I want to speak about, that I know the next speaker, is load matching. And load matching is also a really important concept for urban planners to understand, that sometimes optimizing solar energy with the highest annual yield is not always the right way to go. Sometimes it's better to I wouldn't want to say sub-optimize, but have a yield that goes more over the seasons and a longer time during the day, because and match it to the energy demand rather than just having a high energy yield and putting a lot of the out to the grid. And then obviously this is also a more important aspect in northern countries where it's colder and we want heat when it's dark, as opposed to, for example, Australia, where a lot of electricity goes to air conditioners, and it makes more sense having PV and air conditioning together. And one way to deal with this in urban planning, and this is just an example from another project we worked on, where you look at it on an urban scale. And this goes back also to setting requirements, because for example, Royal Seaport, the requirements are the same for all developers and all plots. But if you look at this, and this just shows the energy coverage ratio, that is the potential production of PV compared to the estimated energy demand of the buildings. And the more green, the more the more of the total energy demand you can produce from solar energy. But it really points out that, you know, different developers and different plots have different prerequisites to actually have a big yield of solar energy. And the way requirements usually are set today is, for example, about kilowatt hours per square meter, and it's not always fair to all the different plots. But the last thing I want to say, I think for urban planners and the role of urban planners, if they understand the concepts of solar rights, load matching, and the importance of clear targets and requirements, I think that will go a long way to really include solar energy in planning processes, which is often not today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johan. We've got a number of questions coming in, so we'll go through those in a while. So please just send any more in that you wish to ask. Our next speaker is Marja Lundgren. She's also from White Architecture, and she'll discuss the approaches, methods, and tools using examples for different stages in the planning process. So thank you, Marja.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you, ISIS. As you have understood from the all the former speakers, urban planning is a very complex and interdisciplinary process where decisions are made that need to weigh aspects. So the approaches, methods, and tools to assist this process has to support the planner by overlaying facts, visualizing spatially the consequences and opportunities, and calculate the potentials of the potentials of minimizing energy need by conservation and daylight harvesting, minimizing energy by enhancing or avoiding solar gains, and generating electricity through photovoltaics and solar thermal. And to do this without jeopardizing heritage or other important societal aspects. And in relation to solar strategies, there are obvious conflicts with cultural and historical heritage if not carried out with great care. But there are also great opportunities in the design of new areas. As urban planning documents are long-lasting documents, the plan will determine the possibilities in the future regarding buildings in and solar harvesting. As active solar energy can function as building materials, substituting traditional materials, aesthetic is a vital concern for solar thermal, and photovoltaics to be accepted aesthetic and solar energy. So the aims are to inform and support decision-making in urban planning and to orientate in existing approaches, methods, and tools, as well as presenting new or further developed approaches, methods, and tools for active and passive solar measures in urban planning. And by approaches, we mean different ways of incorporating solar methods and tools into regular planning processes. And by methods, we mean planned procedures already mentioned, and to do so with the help of tools, from crude rules of thumb to more advanced digital modeling. Our definition also implies a hierarchy between the terms, as illustrated in the picture, where approaches incorporates methods that incorporates tools into a planned procedure. And there is a vast amount of good tools already available. Mark showed you several of them. Often it's not the planner, him or herself, that uses them. So it's important to present possible methods with procedures that overlay different environmental aspects together with a spatial concern.
Sorry to interrupt, Marja. I think that your presentation is stuck. Yeah.
My screen has stuck?
Yeah, it's still on the slide with the nice building on it, and I think you've moved on to a different slide. We're having
several different, actually.
Oh.
So maybe
if you
that's
maybe on the other computer, Johan can share the presentation.
We'll try that.
Okay. Sorry about that, everyone. It's just, it might take a minute or two to get it going. Maybe in the meantime, we can take one of the questions while we're setting everything up. Ken? Yeah.
Yes, that sounds like a good idea. I'll go into that. We had one question, which I think was, no, I won't ask a question for Johan. He'll probably be helping out there. So a question for Mark Snow, and also a similar question for Joanna, is how about any special notes on Asian countries or solar energy, for solar energy and urban planning on in Asian countries? And the same person also asked for Joanna whether any reports or case studies related to that. Maybe Mark or Maria may be able to answer that if they can come online and do that. Thank you.
Okay, we do have a couple of case studies and also some frameworks from China who were involved in the task. We also touch a little bit on some of the case studies in other jurisdictions, in Singapore and Hong Kong. Some of those have very traditional, certainly from a legislative perspective, traditional frameworks to England and Australia. But yes, we do have information on that. Admittedly, we would certainly would have preferred to have more information on Japan and elsewhere, but we've tried to create coverage through our research, even if the IEA expert wasn't, or that country wasn't involved in the task.
So where might they be able to find that, Mark?
So we're still producing some of the reports. Now, admittedly, the case studies is already available, but the first report, sorry, the Subtask A report is still to be defined, but should be available in December when the EXCO meet, and that will provide some information specifically around that. I don't know if somebody
accessible. That would
Maria
be
might be able to,
then through the IEA Solar Heating and Cooling website. Is that right?
That's correct. So we're still finalising some of our reports, and Maria may be able to give some context as to, I think there is some good case study examples, certainly from China, in the case studies, but she'll be able to confirm that for you.
Okay, thanks then, Mark. We might now move on for Maria to continue her presentation, because it looks like it's up on Johan's screen. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I'm sorry for this, but now you can see the picture of how there are so many new opportunities in the design of new areas. And I'll just slide through the aims of the report I mentioned before. And I was talking about the approaches, methods, and tools. The fact that there are so many good tools out, but the real aspect for a planner is to get a very good land procedure with different tools, overlaying different environmental aspects and spatial concerns, so that this can come into planning as a routine. And in urban planning, both quantitative and qualitative aspects are relevant. And we want to show examples that inspire in our upcoming report. And as Johan already talked a lot about the possibilities with governance and land owning and land procurement, I will go directly over to the aspect of integrated urban design and planning support. So in order to introduce relevant knowledge at the right time, there are several methods that can be used by existing tools. And they can be used as long as the design of a new area or infill is tested in the planning process. So this can be done on the urban design scale when the urban fabric and morphology is decided for a district or landscape area. And quite important is that the fact that our urbanization is developing along a very steep curve, we are continuing to become more and more in our cities, and density is creating a lot of challenges regarding daylight, for example, and its effects on energy efficiency, health, and well-being of our citizens. And in this slide, I just want to show that as the building pace is happening very fast. In Sweden, for example, it's beyond historical measures. And in order to inform the planning process with the right knowledge at the right time in this very quick building pace, when building dense urban areas, we really need a circular loop from advanced knowledge to be presented in thumb rules that are easy for planners to understand immediately. In Sweden, for example, and in a lot of different legislation standards and certifications around the world, we have an indicator called daylight factor. This is not very easily understandable. You can't feel it or see it as you can the daylight itself. So the urban and building design that you do will need to comply with these rules, and how will the planners in an easy way understand it? In an example that we are presenting in the report and working with, we're showing how the sections, when you're at the stage, you're maybe only working in 2D, still, you aren't going to go over for 3D modulations for later. So it's important to be able to use the nose guideline, a very simple rule that shows you visually correctly that there is where there will be direct daylight and not. And the other part of this section that you see there works with the obstruction angle test. And in the work, in the Swedish work of Task 51, we have been gathering knowledge around the correlation between the obstruction angles and daylight factors for the Nordic latitudes that we transform into thumbs of rule that inform the design and give the information for the planner, so that the planner in very early stages can see where are the challenges before you go over to 3D and have the possibility to actually work with a lot of simulation tools. And this is an example from Denmark, where they have used a methodology combining steps of daylight simulation, active solar simulations, to strive from the goals set on a political level. And several of these simulations were conducted of various versions of the development of the master plans, actually steering the master plans in creating a better compliance with daylight demands, with the ambitions of PV and solar thermal. As Mark showed before, there are several solar potential studies, but to balance the potential studies with the heritage aspect, there has been a LESO QSV method developed by Maria Kristina Probst and Christian Röcke that shows through different steps how you can work with heritage. In this picture, it shows how you first estimate the visibility and then the sensibility of an area. And as you do that, you inform the municipality that can discuss on what level the architectural demands will lay. In order to do so, a toolkit for the LESO QSV method has been developed. The first step is to assess these two factors against each other and to decide whether there's a high, medium, or low demand for architectural integration quality. And the next step for the municipality is to set their own standard by the help of more than 100 cases assembled in a database. The municipality will set the so-called acceptability grade based on accepted and not accepted cases. And then this will guide the process further. Other aspects that we want to point out is the awareness and consultations methods in urban planning that are especially in the later stages when you are within detailed planning and when you're in a situation of getting a building permit. So here, the last task on solar energy and architecture, task 41, has given several Swedish municipalities the material to create guidelines. And we think that these guidelines are in turn a good inspiration for other countries in order to weigh architectural aspects to other aspects of solar. The last slide I'm going to show is about landscape planning. When we are planning solar systems in landscapes, energy analysis and mapping of several environmental aspects is of great importance. In using environmental analysis software, Simone Giostra and colleagues produced a series of different maps for quantitative analysis of relevant parameters. And they were solar radiation, slope angle, surface water drainage, soil content, and other indicators of environmental performance that can inform the planner of these tools through mapping in visual pictures. Several of these examples that we have gathered in the task shows also how the regulated planning process uses an environmental impact assessment that can be vital to weighing these aspects together with the spatial and heritage aspects that we have talked about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to all the speakers. Now, we've had a number of questions come in, and look, the first one I'd like to ask is maybe for Maria or Mark, and that is, what ownership models are you seeing for large-scale solar that are bringing energy into the city?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Just asking, what ownership models are you seeing for large-scale solar that are bringing energy into the city?
Was it directed at me and Marja, or who was it directed to? Sorry.
Maria and Mark, or Mark Snow, I thought. Maria Wall or Mark Snow.
Okay.
Well, it's Maria here. I don't think I have so much to say on the large-scale systems, at least not for Sweden. I'm not sure, because I have not been working with that. I don't know if Johan or Marja, who is practicing, has any knowledge of the situation.
I think that you are right, Maria, that in Sweden we have a lot of other big district energy solutions, which actually makes it most interesting for the real estate holders that can get the same price for solar energy as they have to buy other energy for. So it's actually more on a building level and small scale level in Sweden.
So in Australia, we've got some significant large-scale rollout, and this has been driven by the low cost of large-scale solar, particularly in regional areas of Australia, but also through mechanisms of what has been called a reverse auction process. So when we talk about the ownership model, a lot of the utilities and even European entities have invested heavily and been able to provide a price which has been guaranteed by various jurisdictions, certainly in the ACT and elsewhere, where they can secure a price going forward, and then to be able to basically operate on the spot market for that energy. And there's obviously incentives in Australia for that particular purpose. The thing that I suppose perhaps the question might be angling towards is also ownership of from communities, and this is growing as well, whereby through a power purchase agreement or through an ownership that communities are able to people are able to purchase a certain amount of the large-scale solar. And there's also some fantastic work that has been done in the task through Alessandro Schionomi from NEL in terms of the way in which PV landscapes and large-scale solar interfaces within the urban landscape, and also within the rural and close proximity to city areas. So I guess one of the things that we're seeing is that large-scale solar is starting to become very competitive with conventional on a centralized generation framework, and they're also being linked to hydro storage and other things. So we're seeing investment, although there is uncertainty, certainly from a political situation here in Australia, significant investment in that. Often driven by price. But we are also starting to identify that those who may think about purchasing that power might want to utilize their own business assets, their building assets, to provide their energy needs.
All right, thanks very much for that answer, Mark.
I have a comment. I can just
thanks, Maria.
to say that I recommend to go to the website and check the case study report for the task, and there you find some large-scale systems and lessons learned from them. So maybe you find something of interest in this part.
Yeah, so to get to that, you would go to www.iea-shc.org and then look down the side to tasks and find task 51. Go into that part of the website and then look for case studies. Thank you.
The publication. Yeah.
Okay, now a question from Marja about tools and methods. What problems do you see in the existing tools to design and analyze building applied PV, such as LCA, sensitivity analysis, database information, etc.?
So once more, it was a question of tools with LCA?
Yes, tools, and what sort of problems do you see in the existing tools to design and analyze building applied PV?
So actually we have, LCA is an emerging issue with still a lot of uncertainties, and there is a PVPS 15 working with the LCA of photovoltaics. What I can say is that what you for sure can know is that if you use the PV or solar thermal instead of another material, you will not have the double CO2 costs for the installation. And sometimes you also get more heavy structures if you do not follow the roofs and the angles of a building if you apply the PV. So our first rule is to try to check whether you can actually apply BIPV or BIST in order to lower the embodied emissions.
Okay, thank you very much, Maria. Look, a question for Johan, which there are two questions here related to the Stockholm Royal Seaport, and they're related to one of the graphs that you showed. One showed 2 kilowatt hours per square metre of energy generated for PV. And the question is that the annual average or per day, or what is that? What does that mean? And the second question is related to that as well, that there were a number of developers that you showed. You mentioned that you get more energy from solar thermal than from PVs, but only 2 of those 6 or 8 that were shown use solar thermal. Any discussion on why that's the case? So if you cover those, thanks, Johan.
Yes, first one is easier answer is annually. Sorry for that being unclear. So it's per year. The second question about solar thermal is Marja brought it up quickly, but in Sweden we have a well-established system of district heating that is in all our major cities, and it's very cost efficient, and that makes solar thermal less attractive in Swedish cities. And that's, I would say, the main reason why most developers choose PV rather than solar thermal.
Okay, all right, thank you very much for that. Now, we've got another question about tools. Which is the best computer tool for assessing the potential of availability of solar energy on building envelopes? So I'm just wondering if you could answer that one, please, Marja Lundgren.
I think I will also ask for Mark's help, because the main ambition with the tool presentations that we have is to have this possibility of combining different tools and adding on architectural issues. So, but I know that several of the examples use BIST, but there are a big amount. If you want to, in very early cases, just get the solar insulation, you can use Rhino or anything with a DIVA application. So we really use anything from scripts to more detailed panel estimations. Mark, would you like to add something?
Yes, I mean, again, it depends on what scale and accuracy you're looking at. I mean, 2.5D, there are a number of tools. In fact, Ulrich Leopold, who was partially involved in the task as an observer from Luxembourg, has developed under the MUSIC project a interoperable GIS system which uses RSUN, which is open source technologies. PVSYST and the system advisor model in the UK, in the US, from NREL is also a fantastic tool in the fact that you can download the actual code itself. But we are looking at the way that we can integrate more effectively with 3D modeling tools to be able to better understand the potential of solar for the building envelope, and that includes facades. I'll also just point you to Task 41, even though it was a few years ago, scoped a lot of the tools that are available, and you'll be able to find that through the IEA Solar Heating and Cooling website and direct yourself to Task 41. And we also include some elements of the available tools that would be applicable in the Task 51 Subtask D education tools, and Maria may be able to confirm that, or if I haven't covered anything else.
Yeah, I can just comment that it will be in the report coming later this year on tools in education. There will be some information about existing tools and tests of tools, but also new developments that are ongoing. So you can check back later also.
Yes, there are a number of questions about tools and that, so I think we'll probably leave that for people to follow up, as you've suggested there, Maria.
I can also, Ken, I can also say that again, if they read some of the case study examples in the report on the website, there are information about which tools have been used in the different cases, with some comments on that. So maybe that also is a way to find out more.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Look, we only have a few minutes to go, so we'll just go to one last question, and that is, in future, rooftop PV may dictate the construction and architectural standards for harvesting more solar power. So that's a comment rather than a question, but I think there may be some, if Maria, if you'd like to give us an idea of what you think maybe the future of construction and architectural standards will be to allow more solar energy, both solar PV and solar heating.
Well, I think there will be. I think roofs are a good place to put PV and solar thermal on. So I think there is a good future for that, and also the development of well integrated systems and kind of dummy elements for those parts that are not active collectors. So I think there should be a lot of developments ahead.
Can I also add a couple of comments, Ken?
Yes. No worries.
The Ted James from Department of Energy in the US did a very good review of the difference between the building added solar technologies and building integrated PV, and looked at the levelized cost of electricity. And he identified that whilst the upfront capital cost is higher over time, it is actually a much cheaper approach than building at it, because you're using the tiles or the systems as a building product itself. Now, obviously, there are some issues around standards or waterproofing, warranties of the actual roof itself, but these are being dealt with quite well from an architectural perspective, particularly with some of the products, and I showed some pictures there. Tesla also has the tiles that they're promoting as well. So certainly the utilization of roofs is for residential is clearly apparent, as is its integration with battery storage and also the use of cars, which may be electric as well. And the choices that we are getting now through the way in which glass can be encapsulated and also colored to create different textures and replicate some of the conventional roofing systems that we have. There are also PVT opportunities, and there are also a number of construction companies and roof products that are looking at integration of solar using different technologies.
And I also add that it's also for facades, because with the way we are building today with a lot of different heights and a lot of high rises, the facades are also relevant. And as Johan showed and I showed, we have already integrated that in a facade instead of another material, and a lot of different commercial actors are working with that within standards.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much, everyone. We're just slightly past the closing time, so I'd like to close the webinar now. Don't forget that this webinar has been recorded, and it's available for you to look at later or to pass on to your colleagues who may not be able to hear it at this particular time. Most of the presentations are already online at the ISIS website, and certainly there will be further seminars. There are webinars that are part of the Solar Academy that occur 4 times a year, and we'll try to make sure that you are notified about those. And also ISIS do run other seminars, other webinars at other times. So thank you very much for the wonderful speakers we've had tonight and for the great questions. Unfortunately, we couldn't get through to all of them, and I look forward to hearing more, and I hope this has been a very useful session for you. I'll now pass across to Joanna, who will close the session with a few final remarks. Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you very much, Ken, and thank you also for doing an excellent moderation of this webinar. It was a really nice session, and thank you to our panelist speakers for sharing their knowledge and expertise with us today, and thank you to the Solar Academy for organising this webinar. The next Solar Academy webinar is planned for December in this year, and we hope you tune into that one too. Invitations will be sent to all of you in the coming weeks. I would also just like to quickly remind all of those online about our upcoming joint conference. Registration is still open, and it would be great to see many of you in Abu Dhabi presenting your work at that conference. To contact the panelist speakers for further information about the information presented here, please see their own contact details in their presentations, which will be available to download from the ISIS and IEA SHC websites. If you use social media, we encourage you to connect with us and to continue the discussion and to continue to stay tuned to what's happening with solar energy and urban planning. Last but not least, thank you to you, our audience, for joining us today for this interactive and dynamic webinar. We look forward to welcoming you at the next webinar as well. To view the recording, please just wait a few hours, then we will upload it onto the websites. If you have comments or feedback, we welcome you to share this with us so that we can continue to improve our webinar service for you. Please participate in the survey or send your feedback to public.relations@isis.org. And that's it. We're finished. I'm sorry we went a little bit over time. I hope you all enjoyed it and wish you a lovely start to the day or night if you're in another part of the world. And see you in the next webinar. Bye bye.